Welcome back to another episode of the Lender Podcast. My name is Bryce. I'll be your host. And today we're talking about kind of a juicy topic. This is something that a lot of people have requested from me. And I'm hoping that it'll save you a significant amount of money, somewhere in the realm of around $40,000 or so. Today we're talking about how to set up a fund completely for free. And a lot of people are like, wait, what? I thought it was like this huge expensive thing. And it's not. It's actually completely free and it doesn't cost anything to set up a fund. I don't want to badmouth these guys, not all, because I actually really appreciate their help. But I think maybe some of this is coming from like the hard money bankers guys, because they talk often on their podcast about how it costs $20,000 or whatever it is to start a fund, and it's not true. So today we're breaking it down, the different structures, why it does or does not cost all this money, and hopefully I can save you that money, like I said. So before we jump into the episode, though, today's sponsor is obviously Lender. Lender is a hard money and private money servicing and origination tool. So it handles everything from like the loan application from the borrower all the way down to the servicing piece, collecting payments, and then eventually generating the payoff statements. So if you're currently using Excel or you're not using like a software tool to kind of organize your business, I highly recommend that. That's what we've been using for a number of years now, and it's worked out really well for us. So you can check that out by going to joinlender, lendr.com, joinlender.com, and checking that out. Okay, so full disclaimer here, like I am not an attorney. This is not legal advice, but something that you should probably check into. So let's go over first the three main different fund structures. So there's a Regulation A, there's a Regulation CF, and there's a Regulation D. And the Regulation D is probably what is going to be the best fit for you and the people that are watching. But I want to go over the Regulation A and the Regulation CF first, just because they're still useful to know and it might fit into your business model. And then we can kind of dive deep into the Regulation D. So the Regulation CF first, Regulation CF stands for crowdfunding. And there's some different restrictions with this one, which makes it not great in my opinion for our business, but it's still good to know about. So first and foremost, there's a $5 million max in a rolling 12-month period. So you can have more than $5 million in your fund, but if you're looking to raise capital really fast, this is probably not the way to do that, because you'll hit that cap. The other downside to this, again, and this is just my understanding from speaking with different attorneys, is that you can only have a maximum of around $1,000 to $2,000 per investor. That makes it really prohibitive to raise a lot of money, because you have to go and get a ton of different investors. And so it would be better to just get $50,000 checks instead of $1,000 checks. So not a great option in my opinion. The other thing that's actually great about this is you can have both non-accredited and accredited investors inside of the Regulation CF. So one of the harder part with some of the other things that we'll talk about later is you can only have accredited investors, which is kind of a double-edged sword. That could be a pro, that could be a con, but we'll cover that later. But in a Reg CF, you can have both, which is really nice. The other downside with the Regulation CF is that you have to use something called a FINRA-approved funding portal. And this is basically just a piece of software that's been vetted by FINRA, who has essentially said, this is the management tool that we're going to make you use. So it's an onboarding tool where like investors come and they can see like your offering. That's where they send you funds and it gets all the documents and things like that. And it's probably a good thing. It helps keep you organized. But the problem is these tools are pretty expensive. They're anywhere from like $500 a month up to $2,500 a month. So again, if you're just starting out, they're pretty cost prohibitive, and it's not something that I really want to deal with. And then the last thing you should be aware of is there are still individual state filings. And we'll talk about this more, but let's say you have an investor from Idaho, Alabama, and Oklahoma. I just picked these three states because these are the three states that we mainly lend in. But let's say you have investors inside of your fund from those three states. You have to file state filings with the state of Idaho, the state of Alabama, and the state of Oklahoma just as soon as you have an actual investor invested in your fund. So it's not like you have to pay all these fees to all 50 states. It's as soon as they are subscribed to your fund, and then you go and do these filings. And the filings are, I've seen anywhere from like $0 all the way up to like $600. I think, for example, Florida, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't have a filing fee, but like Washington State, for example, has like a $600 filing fee. And this is not per investor. It's just like per state. So if you have 100 investors from the state of Washington, you'd only have to pay that $600 fee once, which is really great. And again, I could also be wrong, but it's my understanding that this is not an annual thing. It's just a one-time deal that you have to pay and say, hey, these are where the investors are coming from. So again, that's the Regulation CF. Not my favorite, but still good to know because it could be valuable for you or something, something that you're doing. Now, Regulation A is kind of the next cohort, and it's the most flexible, but it's also the most expensive. And there's actually two different tiers inside of Regulation A, but I'll break down tier 1 first. So in the tier 1, you can raise up to $20 million in a 12-month period. So significantly more than the Reg CF. This is a great option. I don't know too many people out there who are going to be hitting that upper, $20 million limit in a 12-month period. That's pretty great. The nice thing is you can publicly solicit. So in some of the other structures and formations, you're not allowed to advertise publicly. You can't do radio ads. You can't do paid ads. You can't, put it on your Facebook and say, hey, I have a fund, come invest. But with the Regulation A, you can publicly solicit, which is great. The other thing is it's open to both non-accredited and accredited investors. So again, very flexible. You can take all sorts of different kind of investors. Oftentimes people will refer to this as like a mini IPO. So it's not as extensive as like a full IPO where you have to do like tons of all these crazy financials, but it's still like, it's pretty in depth and can take anywhere from like 6 to 9 months because the SEC has to register you, and you know what I mean? Like it's still like fairly intense. So with the Regulation A, you also have to use that FINRA approved funding portal, like I talked about on the Reg CF, which, definitely adds some complexity and some costs there. The other thing is that your financial statements in a Regulation A, they have to be reviewed, but they don't necessarily have to be audited. And I don't know necessarily what that distinction is, what that line is, but still good just to know the difference. There's no reporting requirements, which is pretty great. And then similar to the Regulation CF, you still have those individual state filings, anywhere from like $0 to $500 per state. So I think at one point I did all the math, and if I was to get at least one investor in every single state, it would have been somewhere around like $18,000. So is that expensive? Yes, but the likelihood that you would have an investor in all 50 states in the US, not very likely, so you probably don't really have to worry about that. Okay, and then the last thing is in that tier 1 still under the Regulation A, you do still have to adhere to blue skies laws. So I'm not like amazing. I don't really fully understand all that is entailed in that. But basically blue sky laws are some anti-fraud ways of notifying your investor what you're doing. So I would dive deeper into that, but you do still have to adhere to the blue sky laws. So just something to be aware of. You have to disclose certain things about your fund and the securities that you have inside of those, some of the risks involved, the financial statements, things like that, just so your investors are not in the dark, which honestly is a good thing to do anyway. So probably not that big a deal. Okay, now inside of that Regulation A, you now have, you also have a tier 2. And the tier 2 is very similar to the tier 1, except that rather than having that $20 million limit, it's actually a $75 million limit in a 12-month period, which is huge. I'm sure there are people out there who could do that, but that's like a massive fundraise in just a 12-month period. So significantly larger than the 20 million, but I still wouldn't think that you'd have an issue with 20 million anyway. Inside of the tier 2, you are exempt from the blue sky laws, which is probably nice, but the downside is you have to have your financial statements not only reviewed, but they have to be audited, and they have to be submitted annually and semi-annually. So it's pretty extensive. And most of the time, people will outsource this to like a CPA or like a fund manager because it is kind of just so detailed and it's kind of a pain in the ass. And that, depending on how many, investors that you have in the fund, that can be pretty expensive. So just, something that you should be aware of. But again, this is like a full blown registration with the SEC. Could take 9 months to a year to get it all set up. A lot more flexibility, but also a lot more cost. So you really want to be aware of kind of what you're doing. So let's now talk about the Regulation D. Now that we've got those two out of the way, just because these are the most common structures that hard and private money lenders are going to, interface with or interact with and deal with. And kind of a funny side note is I would say that like 98% of investors who or lenders who create a fund, they would probably be okay with a 504 instead of a 506 filing. But it's funny because the 504, I think, allows you to have $10 million, whereas the 506 allows you to have, an unlimited amount of investor capital. So most people, I don't think, really cross that $10 million threshold, but it's just funny that a lot of people could have less hassle by doing the 504, but instead everybody goes with the 506. So anyway, all that to say that, there's some different structures out there. So, okay, so we've talked about the Regulation A, the Regulation CF. Now we have the Regulation D. And like I said, this is probably the most common for private and hard money lenders, and more than likely, what you're going to be using for yourself. Now, inside of the Regulation D, there are two different distinctions. There's a 506B and there's a 506C. And we're going to talk about the differences, and they're very similar, but there are some subtle differences that are super important that you have to be aware of. So 506B, first and foremost, there's no limit on the amount of funds that you can have in the fund, which is great, especially compared to the A and the CF where there are caps. There's no cap whatsoever, which is perfect. With the 506B, there's no public solicitation, which means no, you cannot put it on Facebook. You cannot do paid ads. You can't do radio ads, TV ads, nothing of that sort that could be shown as just general advertising. And I don't know fully why that is, but it's just not allowed with the 506B. So all of it has to be like existing relationships. So friends and family or friends of friends or whatever. But the big distinction here is there has to be a pre-existing relationship. You can't just take like anyone and everyone. It has to be something that like, oh, we went to high school together, or we went on this trip to Aruba and we, talked for 2 weeks and shared a room, or, whatever it was. Like if you were to ever get like audited, you need to have a substantial relationship that shows like, no, I knew these people, ahead of time. The nice thing about the 506B is you can have both accredited and non-accredited investors. But the non-accredited, you can only have 35. You can have unlimited accredited investors. So again, kind of nice if you have like a pretty warm network already, but people aren't necessarily accredited. Makes it kind of nice because, you can have people who haven't hit that accreditation status and still have them join your fund, which is pretty great. And then kind of last but not least, again, you still have to do all the individual state filings with the 506B that I mentioned earlier, but only as soon as an investor subscribes. So not before, just like they can subscribe to the fund, and then I think you have 15 days to submit that filing with the state, and then you're good to go. So just it's nice that you don't have to spend the money beforehand, and then like the investor doesn't end up signing and subscribing to the fund, and then you're not out those funds. So kind of nice. Okay, last but not least is the Regulation D 506C. This is the one that I think caters to most hardened private money lenders, and it's very similar to the 506B. The only main difference is that solicitation is allowed, meaning you can publicly solicit, you can advertise, you can do Google ads, Facebook ads, whatever it is to solicit the fund and say, hey, come join, we'll pay you 10% or whatever it is. The only downside is they have to be accredited. And an accredited investor is somebody who has a net worth of $1 million, excluding their primary residence. And also, they have to have made at least $200,000 in the last 2 years and reasonably expect to make the same in the coming year. And if you're married, filing jointly, you have to bump that $200,000 up to $300,000. So $1 million net worth, excluding your primary residence, and anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 in annual income, which is, those are pretty steep requirements. So it's pretty important that you understand that distinction, because you can publicly solicit, but you still can't take on anyone and everyone. And then similar to the 506B and all the other ones, you do still have to do the individual state filings for the investors that you have in your fund. Our fund is set up with 506C. Reason for that is so that we can take accredited investors. It's been more difficult than I expected to raise capital, but in my mind, it will be easier to get $100,000 checks or $250,000 checks rather than $10,000 or $20,000 checks from non-accredited investors. And I know that's not perfect. Like, it's not like if you're not accredited, you don't have money, but if you're accredited, you do. Like, I know it's not like that cut and dry. In my mind, like if you are accredited, you probably have more funds available to invest than somebody who is non-accredited. But that's just why we've decided to go with the 506c. Now, here's a question that I'm sure a lot of people have, and the question is, can you have both a 506b and a 506c? The answer is yes, but you probably shouldn't. And the distinction there is, if you have a 506b and a 506c, the offerings have to be entirely separate. It's not like you can set up a fund for the 506b for non-accredited and then the 506c for accredited and just cater to everybody. No, like you're definitely going to get in trouble if you do that. If you want to have both, the offerings have to be like entirely separate. So like your 506b, let's say you're accepting investors for mineral rights and mineral drilling. And then with the 506c, that's your hard and your private money lending fund. Those offerings are so different, where this is like mineral rights and this is real estate. Like, I think in my opinion, again, not an attorney, but in my mind, those lines are not blurred at all. But if you're doing like commercial and then there's some residential, there's like, there's like some overlap there, and we don't really want to do that. So I would say pick whatever structure works best for you, and just kind of be aware that like, you have to bite the bullet and say, do I want accredited or not accredited? Do I want to be able to solicit or not solicit? And really, I think those are the things that the big sticking points that you have to decide. It's like, do I want non-accredited? Do I not? You know what I mean? Like it's just, anyway. Now, as far as setting this up, what all is involved? The thing is it's actually pretty easy to set this up. So first things first is you have to go to the Edgar, EDGAR, Edgar website. It's on the SEC's website. You have to register with Edgar to be able to get like these passcodes, which you then take those passcodes, and that allows you to access the SEC's filing website. And I'll be honest, the Edgar website as well as the SEC website, it's a pain in the ass, man. Like, the government is not known for being super tech savvy. It is very much a government website, and it's a pain because it's old, it's antiquated. You have to print off these documents and then go and get them notarized and then uploaded. And I had to do it like 3 or 4 different times because I kept like filling things out incorrectly, and it just like, it was annoying because they would be nitpicky and say, well, you need to change this. So I'd go and change it and get it re-notarized and upload it. And then they'd have something else to kind of complain about. So just be patient. It takes a while with the back and forth to go and get your Edgar access codes. But once you have that, you take those codes and then you can go to the SEC's website and you just file a Form D. It doesn't cost anything. It's completely free. But this is where it kind of gets like a little hairy. Attorneys, in my opinion, are worth the money. Do I think it's worth $40,000? No, but I think it's worth some sort of like counsel to hold your hand as you walk through it, because there are some like different nuances. But the cool thing too is you can look up other filings. So you can look up my filing. I don't know that I necessarily did it like 100% right, but there's like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of filings on the SEC's website, and you can just pull them up and see how they did it. So you might be able to search and find another fund that is registered in a similar way that you do it. So similar size offering, similar number of investors, similar thing that you're investing in, whether it's like raw land or agriculture or mineral rights or just general real estate. You know what I mean? Like, it's find somebody who has already filed something that is very similar to what you're planning on doing, and then you can, for the most part, just like copy paste, and it's really not that difficult. Now, I realize that is a lot of information to kind of digest and go over. For the most part, like I said, you'll really probably either just have to decide between the 506B or the 506C, and then you can go and get your fund filed and registered with the SEC. Now, after that's all done, what exactly do you need to give to your investors? And there's a couple of main important documents. The first being something called a PPM. It's a private placement memorandum. It is this big, long, massive, like 60-page document of legal jargon, and it goes over every single thing for your fund. And like, it goes over like who the board members are, who is facilitating the fund, how are those members compensated, the different structure, like the fees that are drawn from the investors, what all that covers, how much it is. It goes over the different like investment strategies. It goes over like your risk tolerance, like every single thing that you can think of. Like, it must go in that PPM, just because we want to inform our investors of every single type of thing that could go into the fund. And we just want to make sure that they're super well informed. At the end of the PPM, usually there's something called a subscription agreement. And the subscription agreement is what they will fill out in order to subscribe to the fund. So they read the PPM. If they agree with all that, they subscribe to the fund, they sign that, and then along with their funds, they send you that subscription agreement, and they are now a member of the fund. And then the last thing that you should probably include, well, maybe two things, is an investor questionnaire. Basically just going through and like really qualifying that they either are accredited or non-accredited. And ours goes pretty in depth, like what was your profession? Why do you feel like your risk tolerance is at the level where you can invest in the fund? Does this align with your overall investment strategy? Is like the amount of money that you're allocating to the fund, is it a significant, substantial portion of your overall net worth? Does it put you in any kind of financial bind? Like tons of different questions to really qualify. Yes, these people are accredited and they're qualified to join the fund. It's the last thing that I want to do to have somebody who's not qualified join the fund, because I don't want to put them in a bind. You know what I mean? So really like dial in that investor questionnaire so that you can really, really qualify these people and make sure that they should be in the fund in the first place. And then the last thing that I would do is give a copy of your operating agreement. And the operating agreement is probably for like, it goes in and says like who the members of the LLC, what the voting rights are, and just, a very simple operating agreement, because as a member of the fund, they should be entitled to all that. At least that's my personal opinion. They need to see like who are the managing members and what are the percentages and what's the compensation structure and all those different things. So generate a PPM, subscription agreement, investor questionnaire, and an operating agreement. And those are like the four main documents that your investors should probably find or fill out, and then they'll be able to subscribe to the fund. Okay, that is a lot to cover, but it's my opinion that the fund structure is probably one of the best ways to do a hard or private lending business, just because you don't have to do all this like back and forth with sending the funds to the investors and then like dealing with the placement, and then like you have a project that's closing but the wire didn't get there in time. You know what I mean? Like in the fund, like you have a bank account set up, and you hold on to and control those funds, and it just makes it a little bit easier in my mind. So hopefully I didn't scare you. I think really, I really dove into this deep because I was about ready to pull the trigger. I was about ready to spend $30,000-$40,000 to have somebody go and set up my fund. And I found out this is probably an easier, cheaper way to do it. So anyway, that's it for today's episode. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. Let me know if you have any questions, because we definitely covered a lot. But hopefully that helps, and we'll chat next week.